Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to Junia Doan's The Spark. I'm Junia Doan and thank you for joining us today. With me is my guest, Dr. Jeffrey Koperski, Professor of Philosophy at the Saginaw Valley State University and author of Physics of Theism, God, Physics, and the Philosophy of Science. Welcome, Jeff. What does philosophy encompass?
Philosophy is incredibly broad. So we do everything from ethics to logic, metaphysics, which has to do with the nature of reality itself. Epistemology is how we know that reality, and on through to more specialized areas like the philosophy of science. That's what I specialize in. Philosophy of religion, aesthetics, which has to do with the philosophy of art. So it's an incredibly broad field.
Well, the philosophy of religion focuses on what?
Philosophy of religion is very close to systematic theology. So it'll have to do with matters of the existence of God. What do we want to say about the different religions? How do we relate different religions? Arguments, again, for the existence of God, problems for God. Problem of evil is a classic big problem. If God is all-knowing and all-loving, all good, then why is there evil in the world? It's a classic problem.
Good question.
It is a very good question. My students like that question very much. So yes, those are all big questions, big standard questions in the philosophy of religion.
Is there a standard definition of what God is?
No. So
give us a few.
Well, if we start with, say, just there's different sorts of theism. So you have polytheism. That would be the ancient Greeks with lots of different gods that are very much like us, just better, bigger, better, more powerful, up through monotheism. So this sort of thing you'll find in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and that is a sort of different being. So yes, intelligent, yes, loving, but not just a bigger, better version of us. So it's easier to give examples, I think, than give you a definition. That's one nice thing about teaching the philosophy of religion. When the students come in, unlike some areas of philosophy, they already know some stuff. They already have some beliefs about the nature of God and our place in God's creation, or they could be atheists and agnostic. So I really don't have to define that particular term.
What are they interested in when they sign up for your course?
They don't necessarily know if it's philosophy of religion. They know they have some maybe religious beliefs or anti-religious beliefs, and they might want to talk about that. And it's not until we get into the class where I start laying out the issues and they realize, theists, for example, I have Christians in the class who maybe want to have a number of different things true about God. And sometimes those things may not fit together so nicely, and so they see that maybe some view that they have, there's a tension there or an argument against it, and so that's when the class gets interesting, when they start trying to put everything together, and sometimes things fit together nicely, and sometimes they don't fit together nicely.
Sometimes I read that there's a tussle between faith and knowledge.
Faith and knowledge, science and religion. There has been a stereotype that's been around, a line that's been actively and intentionally passed down that the two are in conflict or at war with one another. I think that's one of the great myths that I try to take on in my writing. Virtually no scholar, I think I could say no scholar, actually holds a conflict view or a warfare view between science and religion. That is a view that's been promoted by people who generally don't like religion all that well. So they want to say it's science versus religion. Science wins, and so religion should just go away. They're the ones who like the conflict model.
And give us a couple of other scenarios how you or others might see it besides that one.
The standard ones would be independent, apart from conflict, independence. So some have argued that the two realms, science and religion, are simply their own sort of disciplines, and they don't overlap at all. And since they don't overlap, they can't even possibly conflict. And so people have said that science is the realm of fact and knowledge and experiment, and religion is the realm maybe of value and ethics. And so they're just completely different things. They can't conflict in the same way auto mechanics can't conflict with baking. They're just different sorts of things. I think that view and the conflict view both are problematic. The most popular one among scholars is what's been called dialogue, that there's some sort of interrelation between the two, and that the two disciplines can learn from each other. And certainly historically that has been the case.
What can they learn from each other?
The easiest answer to the question is if we look back in history, the main contribution for religion into science was during the time of what we call now the scientific revolution. So before that time, if you went back to the time of the ancient Greeks, Aristotle and through the Middle Ages didn't believe in the laws of nature. They believed that nature was orderly, but they didn't believe that there were laws that in some sense made things be a certain way. So for Aristotle, if I pick up the glass and let it fall, well, I won't do it, but I let it drop. And it will always do that. Every time you pick up a rock, it will always fall. For Aristotle, the reason for that was that rocks have an internal essence to them. And in some sense, they literally want to get to the center of the earth. That's why they fall when I drop the rock. It wasn't until the time of Descartes, the early modern period, 17th century, Descartes, Isaac Newton, Boyle, all the big names that you would see if you were looking into the history of science, with this notion that nature was governed by laws came into place. It was a very theistic notion. They believed there was a God, and that this God had created a world that was orderly and had made it law-like. So the laws of nature, from their point of view, had to do with God and what God had ordained. And so that's one big contribution. We still use that notion. If you take a physics class or a chemistry class today, you're probably not going to hear that notion of laws of nature came from a theistic background. But of course, we still use the notion of laws of nature and the uniformity of nature, that the laws are the same here locally as they are out around Andromeda and the like. There are lots of notions in science that we still make use of that came very clearly historically from a theistic point of view.
Did Darwin, and I'm trying to remember the other man's name, who lived out in Asia and who really sort of developed or proved, so to speak, evolution, that changed the concept of religion for its time? No? Yes?
Yes and no. I mean, people reacted to it differently. So some of Darwin's closest associates were theists, were Christians, and saw no conflict between the two. Saw ways that the two could be made compatible, and I think that is today probably the majority view. Of course, there are others who thought that they can't be compatible, and that Genesis, the early chapters of Genesis, should be interpreted in one particular way that is in conflict with an old Earth and with Darwinian evolution. The ironic thing is that around 1900, if you went back just over 100 years ago, young Earth creationism was much less popular then than it is today. So most Christian leaders around 1900 had no problem with the notion that the Earth has been around for millions or billions of years. They might have had some problems with the notion of Adam and Eve and how that all gets fit together, but the notion that somehow young Earth creationism is the standard view, that's more popular today than it was 100 years ago.
In your book, you talk about methodologies, some scientific methodologies could apply to religion. What did you have in mind?
Well, there's things, I think, in terms of what does science ultimately do, how does science explain, come up with new theories and the like. There's all different forms of logic that are involved. There's deduction, there's induction. But in general, for the most part, it's what philosophers call inference to the best explanation. So there's
inference to the best explanation.
Inference to the best explanation, and you're familiar with this because you do this all the time, and your doctor does this. If you have some sort of symptoms of some sort of illness, you go to your physician. They take your family history. They listen to what you have to say. And maybe run some tests, and then when all the data is compiled, they come up with the best overall explanation for all the information that they have. And the best explanation then is the one they usually go with. They'll make a prescription based on the best explanation they can come up with. This is what scientists typically do as well. They have some data, they have background knowledge of general things they think that already have been shown about the nature of reality and whatever the area that the scientist is working in, and all told them, given their background knowledge, given the data, given the input of other experts, they will come up with the best explanation for whatever the phenomena is. I think that same sort of thing happens in religion as well. I think that
Should it happen more?
It absolutely should. Yes, it absolutely should. But I don't think it's fundamentally. This is one of the reasons I don't like that independence model of science and religion, because ultimately I think that we're all doing the same sort of thing. We're all taking all the knowledge we have and all the stuff that we can find out about the world, and we're trying to come up with the overall best explanations we have for all sorts of things. Ultimately, that's what religion and the various religions are doing. They're trying to come up with the best theories of God and faith and the things that they think to be true about nature and the universe.
How does the concept of miracles fit into this?
Miracles are going to be part of religion and typically not part of science. That's true. Miracles are interesting. That's really what some of my most recent work has been on. Miracles are interesting because most people, when they think about it and want to give perhaps a definition of miracle, is that miracles are violations of the laws of nature. Generally, they would say it's God. If there's going to be a miracle, it's God who's doing it, and that if God is going to do something here, then he's got to violate the laws of nature. I don't think that's true. I think there are ways that God could behave and act within nature that don't violate God's own laws. But yeah, that is going to be a place where you're right on the intersection between science and religion, for sure.
One could say that there are forces that one doesn't understand that caused whatever is defined as a miracle, or that it comes from something we can't even say or didn't notice.
Right.
You know, sometimes I look at these Escher paintings, you know, you can do up the stairway or down the stairway differently just depending on how you take it in, you know, and oftentimes I'll lose a ring or my glasses, and you know, I know they're around and I'm hunting and I don't see them. I keep going to the same places, my desk over and over again, and suddenly they're there. And I'm saying, how is it that I just didn't see them last night or this morning? And I can't explain that other than my eyesight tuned them out, even though I had in mind to see them. Do you have a comment on that or an explanation of that?
An explanation? No, I think what you just said at the end there is probably right. That it's more of a psychological matter. That for whatever reason, if you had expectation that your glasses weren't in some place, then yeah, we often fail to see things that we aren't expecting to see there. So I think that's a question more for psychology than philosophy.
But it could raise really a spiritual question as well, could it not? If we're looking for something or looking not to find something.
Oh, sure. Certainly. Our expectations, our background knowledge and expectations, when we're approaching something that some people might consider to be a miracle, others will not because of where they're coming from to actually view or discuss that matter. Certainly.
I always looked for fact, and then I started to say, wait a minute. Let's get more finesse in this. Let's get more subtlety. If we assume this happened, could it have happened for this reason or that understanding or this or that? And all of a sudden, for myself, I saw complexity. You know, the interrelationship of the not asked and not known.
Sure.
And our culture, I don't think, lives in that space right now, but I think it's a useful position to at least personalize, to ask yourself, what am I missing?
Many of us are awfully sure of ourselves. There's no doubt about that. Even in areas where we don't necessarily have any training, all of our Twitter followers agree, and so we're all online with some particular perspective. Yes, that's true.
I've been practicing something as late as I mentioned just before we began. I was invited to the National Prayer Breakfast, and out of that I listened to a lot of people in the surround events and so forth. And one of the things that I came out with was open your heart, because they emphasize what do we have in common, not our differences, what do we have in common, what do we share. And I think that's personally useful, but also societal usefulness. What do we have in common first, rather than the fight is on about
That's right.
about this and that.
That's right.
But do you feel or know or postulate that ethics are different in the different religions? Sometimes you read, oh, they're all the same, but are they?
There are differences, certainly. there are fewer differences, I think, within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There's going to be a lot of similarity there. More differences between, say, Christianity and Eastern thought. But for the most part, I would say, in terms of ethics, there's an awful lot of agreement. Yes, I think there is an awful. It's not the same. It's not uniform, but I think there is a lot of agreement when it comes to ethics.
And what is important to know and practice once you've taken your course?
That's a good question. Depends on the course. There are different sorts of courses that I teach. For the ethics courses, they tend to be fairly practical, and so I really do hope that my engineers, I teach engineering ethics.
So
interesting. Kind of like business ethics or healthcare ethics. This is aimed at engineers and computer scientists. So I do hope that yes, they will have a fighting chance of making better decisions when they're out there in the business world. Some of the things you are faced with out there aren't the sort of ethical decisions you're used to making just interpersonally or with one's family. So that one has a very, very practical application. And then for others, for the other classes, I hope they're more curious. I hope they're maybe less dogmatic, depending on which way they come from. I hope they take a bigger scope, a bigger approach to some important questions. Certainly.
For the engineering course, what are the questions? 3 questions, 2 questions, 1 question that they ought to ask themselves as they go about their professional career? Applications.
Well, some of them overlap with matters of business, which you'd see in business ethics, things like conflicts of interest and the like. But primarily, again and again, it'll be a matter of safety. That engineers are in a particular place, a unique place for the systems that they're working on to actually be able to foresee what could possibly go wrong, who could be hurt and how, and if they don't see those things or ignore them or just assume that somebody else has got all that wrapped up. And so it's really not their job. If that's their approach, then people get hurt again and again and again. We see case studies, which is what we do a lot of in that class, where people are getting hurt, not because it's evil people are taking advantage, it's just decent people who aren't thinking that they have an ethical obligation to get all the details.
Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm. What is evil, in your opinion?
What is evil? Depends what you're asking. I mean, if we're talking about the nature of evil itself, I'll go back to Augustine, who I still think had the best answer. Literally, evil does not exist, which doesn't mean I'm just denying it and closing my eyes to evil, but the nature of evil is much like the nature of darkness. So if they shut off all the lights in here, it's going to get really dark, but I don't think that darkness comes flooding into the studio. I think that a dark room is a room where there's an absence of light, and that was Augustine's analogy, that the relation between light and darkness is like good and evil. So there's a reality to good, but what we call evil, situations that we rightly call evil, is where there's an absence of good. So it's not, good and evil are not equal and opposite. It's not like positive and negative charge. There's a reality to goodness that there is not in evil, but where goodness is lacking, that's what we call evil. That's at least a theistic answer to the question.
But maybe incomplete from my point of view, because
Sure.
that assumes that someone turned out the lights, but who is the someone? Or when there's intention to turn out the light,
Oh, sure.
there's responsibility.
Yes. So this goes back to that big question about the problem of evil, right?
Yes.
If God is all good and all powerful, then how do we account for evil in the world? What you're gesturing toward is what philosophers would call the free will defense.
Well, I'm an American.
Okay, well, certainly.
So that's we live choice.
We do. So, but for people who have free will, and that's all of us. And if you think that we ultimately then are creatures who were created by God, maybe through a process, but here we are. We're something like what God wanted to make us. But God gave us free will. Well, it looks like that the having of free will entails that the possibility of people with that free will using it badly. And so when people use their free will to do evil acts, I don't think that's on God. That's not God's responsibility for that. It's the evil person. I can remember in September 11th, people asking, how could God let this happen? I remember seeing people on TV, how could God let this happen? Well, it wasn't God who knocked down the buildings, right? It was people who used their free will and used it badly in this case. And the responsibility for that is on those people with making that poor free will choice. That's not on God. I think God wants us to exercise our free will, wants us to have free will, doesn't want us to be robots, automata. He could make us behave perfectly in every situation. He just would have to take away free will. But I don't think he wants to relate to us as persons that lack free will, that relate to us as robots.
During that period, I never mistaken the idea that ours was the only culture, because I thought, horrible as it is, it's their culture that deemed it a good. You know, if you're not Islamic, you're dead. I mean, you know, you're the great Satan or whatever. And what I learned from that is, you know, things are not equal. You know, you have to watch the culture, but more particularly, you have to watch inside yourself. That what you do, you know, look for the ramifications, short-term and long-term, because inevitably there are long-term things you don't expect to.
Sure, unforeseen consequences, unforeseen effects. That's a difficulty for all of us.
It is a difficulty, and I'm not sure. I think sometimes we're so impulsive that I just wonder how it is. So I study myself inside, because people talk to me, oh, we have to have world peace, and I tell them, start with yourself.
It would be helpful.
You know, if you have peaceful inside, you know, peaceful feelings towards people, towards yourself, towards your environment, helpful. That's peaceful. That you can teach. If you're angry and you want to do this, and you're rebelling, and you're the resistance, you're the whatever. You're not in a peaceful place inside.
We're much better at finding fault in others, that's for sure. Other people that have different political views within our culture, people that are in other cultures, it's always easier to point the finger. And certainly for the place to start, I think, is, you're exactly right. It's a change within us. Matters of virtue, matters of character with us as individuals. If we can't do that, we can't become somewhat better as individuals, then the society is not going to get any better. And it's not going to be by simply passing a law that things are going to get better.
Part of me thinks that we should encourage our young and old to ask big questions. What would those couple of questions be?
Well, I am a theist, so I think whether God exists and what God's role is in our lives and in his desire for us as people in society, I think it's a good big question. Matters of ethics, like we were talking about before, for the most part, I think people just fly by the seat of their pants. They just react, and whatever they come up with, they kind of think, well, that's fine. And it's awfully odd, especially I say, when it comes to the existence of God, that I think many people just think, well, I can just think about it. So I can sit quietly in my room for a while and maybe light a candle or something and reflect, and then I will come up with the right answer. And so, we would never take that approach for dentistry or anything else. There's always, we look for people who actually have knowledge, have answers. We go to them and try to get some expertise involved. There's almost nothing in life where we think we can just come up with the right answer on our own. For some reason, matters of religion and sometimes matters of ethics, we think that without any input from anybody else, we can just kind of think about it, and there, I've got it, and I'm good.
And what about this concept of a closed universe versus an open universe?
As far as you mean, whether the universe will go on forever, expanding forever?
The role of God in
I
it.
see. I'm sorry. I see what you mean. Sure. So scientists will generally assume, this goes back to that question of miracles, that the universe is closed in the sense that whatever happens here is merely a matter of naturalistic forces and causes bumping together to produce some sort of effect. Of course, if there is a God, and it's not quite right, it's a little naive to talk about God being outside the universe. It's not like it's a snow globe that God is watching. I think God's relation to the universe is more complicated than that. But this notion of an open universe is such that, yes, God can do things here, answer prayer and do other sorts of things within our universe. And so some people want to deny that and keep God as, say, merely a creator. and maybe a sustainer of the universe, and that's it. That's all God can do.
But you see it. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Well, but others want a more interactive view. They think, no, actually, God, there is such a thing as answered prayer, and there are things God does throughout time apart from just creation itself.
Oh, interesting. I always wondered if there's a God, why did he create cockroaches?
Well, yes.
You know?
I think there's a reason, but I don't know if I have it.
Please tell me. Anyway, I thank you for being part of the program,
very glad to be here.
I'm very glad to have had this conversation. So there are several things we need to consider in our life. What's knowable based on methodology, epistemology, and what's opinion? We need to think about the open and closed universe and the concept of evil within ourselves and also outside. And is evil the absence of light, as he said, and that makes the darkness, or is in fact it encompasses free will? Just something to think about. And also that if you live your life in a reflective way, yours is richer. He talks about sitting aside quietly, having a candle. We're so busy, but the person and the God, I align with God personally, and I know when I'm off, and I try every day to say, please, what is it you direct me to do? What do I need to say may be the right thing to everybody? It doesn't mean it always works, but I try to have some consciousness about this. So it's not important if you believe, you don't believe, understand science, understand not all knowledge is known now, as he says in his book. It's true until it's falsified. And thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. And remember, go out and be kind for someone you know and someone you don't know, and do it again. And thank you so much. So, thank you.
To contact Junia, send her an email at juniadownsthespark@gmail.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadownthespark.com. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on Junia Doan's The Spark.
Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.